The rain had stopped just an hour before she arrived. A soft mist clung to the windows of the towering Waldorf Astoria in Midtown Manhattan, where the annual Fontaine Foundation Charity Gala was in full bloom. The entrance was a sea of evening gowns, velvet tuxedos, and champagne flutes, glittering beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than Grace Taylor's entire salary. She felt ridiculous. Her simple navy blue dress, borrowed from a fellow teacher, hung too loose around her shoulders and too tight around her ribs. Her shoes pinched. Her hair had been styled into something presentable by the school secretary in the teacher's lounge that afternoon, using nothing but a curling iron and hope. Grace didn't belong here. She knew that. Everyone else seemed to know it too. The principal of Roosevelt Elementary had practically shoved the invitation into her hand earlier that week.
You're young, smart, charming.
The donors love that. And the Fontaine Foundation gave us $50,000 last year, she had said, as if that alone justified throwing Grace to the wolves of high society. Now, standing in a sea of millionaires and legacy families, Grace tugged nervously at the thin silver chain around her neck, a habit she'd had since childhood. The pendant at its center, a tiny anchor no longer than her pinky nail, was worn smooth from years of her fingers rubbing across its surface. It was her talisman, the only thing she owned that predated her time in the foster system. She didn't remember where it came from. Only that she had it when she woke up in a hospital room at the age of 10, bloody, terrified, and alone. 15 years later, she still wore it.
Not for meaning, not for memory, juste for confort.
A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and Grace snagged a glass more for something to hold than to drink. Her heels wobbled as she navigated the ballroom, looking for a corner to disappear into. She didn't notice the man watching her from the mezzanine. Luca Moretti stood like a sculpture carved into the architecture of the second floor, perfectly still, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. He was used to faces, especially in rooms like this. He knew the lies behind smiles, the secrets in the tilt of a head, the power plays written in the subtlest gestures. But something about her stopped him cold. It wasn't her dress. It wasn't her awkwardness. It was the necklace. His chest tightened. He took a step closer to the glass railing, eyes narrowing, heart rate climbing in a way it hadn't in years. The anchor. The exact shape, the same curve of the edges, the faint scratch just above the loop where the chain fed through. That necklace had belonged to Isabella. His baby sister. Murdered 15 years ago. He descended the stairs slowly, like a man walking through fog, and made his way across the ballroom, weaving through the crowd as if on instinct. Grace had found a quiet corner near the floral display, sipping her champagne and wondering if it was too early to leave. "Excuse me," a voice said beside her. Low. Controlled.
Masculine.
She turned, and forgot how to breathe. The man standing in front of her was devastating in the kind of way that made heads turn without permission. Tall, sharp suit, dark hair swept back with precision. His eyes, however, were the most unsettling thing, gray, stormy, and focused on her with an intensity that made her spine stiffen. "I couldn't help but notice your necklace," he said.
"Mais ask where you got it."
Grace blinked. I've had it since I was a kid." He tilted his head slightly. "Since when?" "I don't really know. It was with me when I woke up in the hospital. I was 10. A pause. A muscle flickered in his jaw.
"What hospital?" "Brooklyn General."
"Why?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No reason."
"Just, familiar, that's all."
She took a step back, discomfort rising like heat in her throat.
"Do I know you?" "My name is Luca.
Luca Moretti." That name tickled something in the back of her mind, but she couldn't place it. She tried to smile, tried to be polite, but the questions were starting to pile up.
"Grace Taylor."
"Nice to meet you, Grace." He extended his hand. She shook it, hesitantly. His grip was firm, warm, yet restrained. "I'd love to talk more," he said, "if you're not in a rush." She wasn't sure why she said yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask in years. They stepped out onto a private balcony overlooking Park Avenue. The city lights blinked in the misty distance, a soft hum of car horns and traffic below. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," Luca began, "but that necklace, it's not just familiar. It's identical to one I gave my sister. 15 years ago." Grace turned toward him, surprise flickering across her face. Your sister.
Isabella.
She was 10. She disappeared. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Luca continued, his voice like gravel and ice. She was murdered. The case was never solved. But that necklace, it was custom made.
Only one like it. Grace en trembled.
Her fingers moved to the pendant again, clutching it as if it might anchor her to the earth. I don't remember much, she whispered. Just blood.
Shadow. A girl in the dark.
She gave me this. Told me to hide. Told me not to tell anyone. Luca stared at her, expression unreadable. But his mind was a hurricane.
15 years. 15 years of silence.
And now the girl who may have seen everything, who might have held Isabella's last breath in her hands, was standing in front of him, wearing a ghost around her neck. We need to talk, he said quietly.
Somewhere more private.
Safer. Safer from what? Grace asked. He hesitated, then said the first true thing of the night.
From the people who don't want you to remember.
The ride from Midtown to the Upper East Side was mostly silent. Grace sat in the back seat of the sleek black SUV, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, the pendant still burning cold against her chest. Luca sat beside her, his posture relaxed but eyes alert, constantly scanning the streets as though expecting a shadow to jump from the sidewalk. He hadn't said much since they left the gala. Just a quiet "trust me," when she hesitated at the idea of leaving with him. And for some reason, she had. It wasn't logic, it was something else. Something in his eyes. In the gravity of his voice when he said her life might be in danger. The car turned onto a quiet street lined with historic brownstones. The doorman greeted Luca with a stiff nod, opened the private elevator, and disappeared into the rain without a word. Grace tried not to stare at the luxury penthouse as they stepped inside. Marble floors, tall windows, bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, and a fireplace that crackled in defiance of the modern world. Luca poured her a glass of water, then sat across from her in the sunken living room, his expression unreadable. Start from the beginning, he said.
Tell me what you remember from that night.
Grace held the glass with both hands, letting the condensation seep into her skin. She hadn't spoken of it in years. Not to anyone. Not even her therapists in foster care.
I don't remember everything, she said slowly. It comes in pièces. Fragments.
I was 10. My foster father, he was not a good man. That night, he hit me hard. I ran.
Just ran into the streets.
I ended up near the docks in Red Hook. There was this old warehouse. I went inside to hide. She paused, her voice trembling. I remember hearing voices. Shouting. Then gunshots.
A girl screaming.
I was hiding behind crates. I couldn't see their faces, just flashes.
Shadow.
And then I heard her.
The girl.
She was crawling. Bleeding. She saw me.
Crawled to me. Grace's fingers trembled around the glass.
She pressed this necklace into my hand. Looked me right in the eyes and said, promise me.
Don't tell anyone.
Hide it. Please. Then she stopped breathing. Luca was silent. His hands rested on his knees, clenched tight. That was Isabella, he said after a long pause. My sister. We were twins. She was innocent. She didn't belong in that world. That night, she was with our father. He was ambushed. Both of them were killed. And the men who did it made it look like a hit from a rival crew. Why? Grace asked, barely above a whisper. Because power always comes with a price, Luca replied.
And someone wanted the Moretti name out of the picture.
She looked down at the anchor around her neck. I've worn this for 15 years. I didn't even know her name. You were the only witness, Luca said. And you've been hidden in plain sight all this time.
Grace shook her head.
I didn't remember clearly. It was too much. Too violent. And no one believed me. I was a foster kid with no ID, no family. They thought I made it up. Luca stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city. Then you're in danger, he said. She blinked. What? Someone from that night is still alive. If they find out you remember, even part of it, they'll make sure you stay silent. Permanently. Grace felt a cold knot form in her stomach. I don't remember their faces. That doesn't matter. The necklace is enough. Whoever gave the order to kill Isabella, whoever ordered that hit, they'll see you as a threat now. Do you know who it was? She asked. I have a few theories, Luca said. But no proof. Not yet.
That is why I need you.
Grace stared at him. Need me? For what? To help me reopen the investigation. To find out who killed my sister. And why? Grace looked down at her hands. The idea terrified her. She was a schoolteacher, not a detective. Not a witness in a Mafia case. But then again, she had already been a witness, 15 years ago. And she had done nothing. Said nothing. Maybe it was time to change that. I don't know how much help I'll be, she said softly. You've already helped more than you know, Luca replied. There was a long pause. Why are you really doing this? She asked suddenly.
Ici justice?
Or revenge? Luca turned from the window, meeting her eyes. Does it matter? It does to me. He hesitated, then sat down again, closer this time. I loved my sister, he said. She was the only good thing left in that house. After she died, everything went dark. I want to know who took her from me. And I want to stop them before they hurt anyone else. Grace studied his face. The anger was there, yes, but so was something else. Sadness. Grief. A quiet kind of loneliness she recognized all too well. I want the same thing, she said finally. But we do it the right way.
Luca gave a half smile. There's no right way in my world, Grace.
Then maybe it's time someone changed that. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the city outside faded.
The fire crackled.
The storm passed. Two people, shaped by the same night, sat in the same silence they'd been running from for years. Later that night, as Grace lay awake in the guest room of the penthouse, she ran her fingers over the anchor pendant and whispered to the darkness, I didn't forget you. Not really. In another room, Luca sat at his desk, staring at a photo of Isabella. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. I found her, he said into the receiver.
The girl from the warehouse.
She's alive. And she remembers. A pause.
A voice on the other end.
Male. Cold. You sure that's a good thing?
Luca's eyes darkened.
It will be. For me. Not for you. Luca hadn't slept in days. The investigation consumed every waking hour. Since Grace's return had reopened old wounds and even older secrets, he had buried himself in records, financials, testimonies, property deeds, and digital forensics, all pointing in one direction.
Vincent Romano.
Luca's father's closest confidant. The underboss who took control of the Moretti operation after the ambush that killed both the Don and Isabella. Vincent had always worn loyalty like a badge of honor. Now, that badge looked more like a disguise. Luca sat in his office, the lights dimmed, an ocean of files spread across his desk. Grace stood behind him, arms crossed tightly, eyes scanning over the names and numbers she didn't fully understand. But the pattern was there, visible even to her. What are we looking at? She asked. Shell companies, Luca said. Formed in 2010. All linked to accounts that moved money through Miami, then to Mexico. It matches the same pattern used by the Castillo cartel. The same cartel that employed the man who shot Isabella? He nodded.
Javier, the VP, Castillo. Known freelance killer with ties to multiple cartels.
But in this case, he wasn't acting alone. Grace frowned. So someone in your family hired him? Not someone, Luca said. He tapped the file at the top of the stack.
Vincent.
Grace leaned over the table, reading the header of the document. It's not proof, she said cautiously. It's suspicious, yes. But this won't hold in a court. I'm not taking it to court, Luca said, rising from his chair. I'm taking it to the council. The council, she repeated.
The inner circle.
The heads of the old families. They governed our world long before laws ever meant anything to us. If I can prove Vincent betrayed blood, they'll take him out themselves. Grace's stomach tightened. She had spent the last few days pretending this wasn't real. That she could help Luca get justice and still walk away untouched. But this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about power, vengeance, and politics soaked in blood. "You're going to confront him?" she asked.
Tonight.
"You're putting yourself in danger." He looked at her. "So are you." She didn't reply. By midnight, the penthouse was quiet. Grace sat alone in the guest room, staring at the anchor pendant. It felt heavier tonight. Downstairs, Luca loaded a pistol and tucked it beneath his jacket. He didn't expect violence. But he had learned long ago that not expecting it was how people got killed. The meeting place was an old Italian social club in the Bronx. Private. Guarded. Sacred ground for the families. Vincent was already there when Luca arrived. He sat at the head of the long wooden table, sipping espresso, eyes gleaming with false warmth. "Luca," he said, spreading his hands.
"You look tired."
Luca didn't sit. "You ordered the hit on my sister." Silence dropped into the room like a guillotine.
Vincent leaned back.
"That's quite an accusation."
Yav Bank Record. Shell Corporation. Wire transfer to Castillo S. Handler. All traced back to your account.
"Interesting." "Isabella wasn't collateral damage," Luca said. "She was the target. Because she was with our father. Because you wanted him dead." Vincent's smile disappeared. "I wanted change," he said finally. "Your father was a relic. Stubborn. Romantic. He believed in honor. But honor doesn't keep the money flowing, Luca. And that girl, your sister, was just in the wrong place."
Luca stepped closer.
"She was 10. Vincent didn't blink. "And you were 15. You've grown. You've adapted.
You understand now."
"Sometimes things have to break for us to rebuild stronger." "You're not rebuilding anything," Luca said.
"You're rotting from the inside out."
From the shadows of the room, other council members emerged. Old men with colder eyes, dressed in suits older than the law. They stood in silence as Luca laid out the evidence. Printed copies. Flash drives. Testimony from old accountants and enforcers who had nothing left to lose. The room was heavy with history. Bloodline. Betrayal. One of the councilmen, Don Federico, finally spoke. "We will deliberate," he said. "Privately." Vincent smirked. "You'll need more than paper and paranoia to kill a man like me." Luca stared at him. "I don't need to kill you," he said. "I just need to prove you killed her." He left the room without looking back. Back at the penthouse, Grace was waiting. "How did it go?" she asked. "We'll know by morning." Luca poured himself a drink. For the first time in years, his hands shook. He sat beside her on the couch, the fire casting golden shadows across his face. "She wasn't supposed to die," he said suddenly. Grace looked over. "I keep telling myself that maybe Vincent didn't mean to kill her. But the truth is, he knew she'd be with our father. He didn't care."
Grace said nothing.
She reached over and took his hand. They sat like that for a long time.
When dawn broke, the call came.
The council had ruled. Vincent Romano was to be executed by tradition, swiftly, without spectacle.
The punishment for betrayal of blood.
Luca nodded once and ended the call. 3 hours later, in the same penthouse where Isabella's death had been avenged in spirit, it was done in body. Vincent stood at the center of the marble floor, surrounded by silence. No trial. No pleas.
Just jugement.
Grace watched from the far end of the room, her face pale. Luca stepped forward. "For Isabella," he said. "One shot."
Vincent crumpled to the ground.
The silence afterward was deafening. Grace turned and walked out. She didn't say goodbye. Luca didn't follow. That night, the city was quiet again. But something inside Grace had cracked. The past had returned, but justice didn't feel clean. It felt heavy. Ugly.
Real.
In the cab back to Brooklyn, she stared out the window and whispered, "Is this what justice looks like?" She didn't know. All she knew was that the necklace around her neck no longer felt like protection. It felt like a weight. A promise kept. But at what cost? The aftermath didn't bring peace. Grace hadn't seen Luca in 3 days. Since Vincent Romano's execution, he disappeared into the shadows of his own world: meetings, damage control, council politics. She had returned to Brooklyn, back to her small apartment, her small life, and the illusion that the nightmare might be over. But it wasn't. She knew at the moment she saw the news report. A break-in at a law firm in Midtown.
Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged.
Except for one file, an archived case from 2010. An unsolved homicide in Red Hook. 2 victims.
One unidentified female witness.
Grace stared at the screen, heart pounding. She didn't need to read between the lines. Someone knew.
She wasn't invisible anymore.
The knock came late that night. 3 sharp raps on the apartment door. She didn't answer.
The rap came again, louder this time.
Grace backed into the kitchen and grabbed the knife she kept in the drawer.
Heure en chouk.
Her phone buzzed on the counter.
Unknown number.
She picked it up. Hello? A voice spoke, calm and slow. You should have stayed quiet. She hung up and ran.
Down the fire escape, into the alley, out into the streetlight of Brooklyn's silent night.
Her feet pounded the pavement as she darted toward the subway, breath ragged, fear flooding every nerve. She didn't stop until she reached a bodega 2 neighborhoods away. She called Luca. No answer. She called again.
Voicemail.
She called a 3rd time and left a message. I think they found me.
Someone knows he was the witness. Someone is watching me.
I need help. She stayed in the corner of the bodega until dawn. Luca found her there. His black SUV pulled up to the curb as the sun rose behind the city skyline. He stepped out, eyes shadowed, face unreadable. She stood before him, exhausted, shaking. Where the hell have you been? She demanded. Working, he said simply. I had to secure the council's backing after Vincent.
You should have been here.
They came for me, Luca. He nodded once. I know. I intercepted the file leak 2 hours ago. Someone traced your name through a sealed juvenile hospital record. It shouldn't have been possible. But it was. Yes. They sat in silence in the car as it drove back toward Manhattan.
Grace stared out the window, eyes low.
Who's behind it? She asked. I thought it ended with Vincent, Luca said. But someone else is cleaning up loose ends. She turned to him.
Someone else from the council.
He didn't answer. Later that morning, in a fortified townhouse in Queens, the answer came. Luca stood before the council again, this time not to accuse, but to warn. There's been a breach, he said. One of us leaked classified records. Grace Taylor's identity has been compromised. Her life is now in danger. Don Federico raised an eyebrow.
And what do you propose?
Full protection, Luca said. Sanctuary, if needed. And an investigation into the leak.
Murmure rippled through the room.
It was Don Matteo, the youngest member of the council, who spoke next. Perhaps this is the universe correcting itself, he said coolly. A girl who should have died now threatens our legacy. Are we really going to burn down our house for a schoolteacher?
Luca stepped forward.
She is the reason we found Vincent. The reason we cleaned our bloodline. You owe her more than silence. Don Matteo smiled.
You sound sentimental. That dangereux.
Luca stared him down.
You sound guilty. Silence.
The next day, Grace was moved into a secure apartment, off the grid, multiple exits, reinforced doors, 24-hour surveillance. But she didn't feel safe. Not anymore. That night, she couldn't sleep.
She paced the floor, restless, memory chasing her like shadow.
The pendant around her neck felt heavier than ever. The door buzzed at 2:43 a.m. The guard at the door didn't respond to her calls. She grabbed the pistol Luca had left her.
En trembling.
A crash.
The back window shattered.
2 figures burst into the apartment, masked, armed, silent.
Grace firait once, missed.
She ran. Down the stairwell, barefoot, heart screaming in her chest. She didn't stop until she reached the underground garage.
Another figure blocked the exit.
Gun raised. She closed her eyes.
A shot rang out.
But it wasn't hers. The man dropped to the floor. Behind him stood Luca, gun smoking in his hand. You okay? He asked, stepping toward her. She couldn't answer. She fell into him, breath ragged, body shaking. Later, when the bodies were cleared and the silence returned, Luca poured her a glass of water. This wasn't just cleanup, he said. This was execution. Then who's giving the orders now? She asked. He looked away. There's one name left, he said finally.
Mario Esposito.
Grace frowned. I thought he was neutral. He pretends to be, Luca said. But Mario is the one who backed Vincent. He let him rise. When Vincent fell, he expected me to follow. Now, he's tying up the last thread. Me. You. She swallowed hard. What are you going to do? He looked at her for a long moment. I'm going to end it. The next evening, Grace begged him not to go. You're walking into a trap, she said. You said it yourself. Mario plays the long game.
You have no choice.
Yes, you do. You can leave. We can both leave. Luca smiled sadly.
You think the world will let US disappear.
I don't care about the world.
I care about you.
He touched her cheek, thumb brushing her skin. And that's why I have to protect you. The next day, Luca faced Mario. Not in a council chamber. Not in a courtroom. But in the ruins of an abandoned cathedral on Staten Island, neutral ground, far from eyes and ears. No words were exchanged. Just bullets. 3 shots. 2 bodies.
Only one man walked out.
Luca. He returned to Grace just before dawn, blood on his hands, exhaustion in his bones. It's over, he said. But she looked at him, and she knew, it wasn't. Not really. Because the war outside was nothing compared to the one inside.
The one that whispered, you can't love a man who kill.
Even if he kills for you. She didn't say it. He didn't ask. They sat in silence as the sun rose through bulletproof glass. The city returned to its usual noise within days, as if nothing had happened. But Grace didn't. The silence that followed Mario Esposito's death wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm has taken everything from the ground, and all you can do is stand in the wreckage and ask what's left. She stayed in the safe house, though she didn't feel safe. The walls no longer closed out the danger, they only kept in the ghosts. Luca was gone most days. Tying up loose ends, re-establishing order within the Moretti legacy. Now that the last threat to his authority had been eliminated, the council fell in line. Some out of respect.
Most out of fear.
He had won. But he hadn't come back whole. Neither had she. They spoke little, mostly in fragments. Did you eat? I'll bring something later. Be careful. You too. It wasn't enough.
Grace stood by the window one evening, watching the streetlight flicker in the rain.
She held the anchor pendant in her hand, fingers curled tightly around it.
She still remembers the girl in the warehouse.
The blood. The whisper. Promise me. 15 years later, that promise had dragged her through fire and loss, into a world she never wanted to touch. And now, standing in a luxury apartment with reinforced glass and a man who had killed to protect her, Grace asked herself a question she had been avoiding. What did survival mean if it cost her soul? Behind her, Luca entered the room. He didn't speak. He stood beside her, his reflection joining hers in the rain-streaked glass. I'm leaving, she said. He didn't move. I can't live like this, she continued. With guards outside my door. With blood on the floor that never gets cleaned up. With a man I care about becoming someone I'm afraid of. Luca finally looked at her. I never meant for any of this to touch you. But it has, she said. It always will. He nodded. Slowly. As if he had already known.
Where will you go? Back to Brooklyn. Back to the school. The kids need normal. I need normal.
Luca said nothing for a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A folded piece of paper. I found this in my father's desk last week, he said. It's a drawing. She unfolded it. It was a crayon sketch.
A girl with long hair, standing under a tree. Another girl Buzzider. Holdingan.
Smiling. It's Isabella's, he said. She drew it a week before she died. She told my father it was a dream she had, that she met a girl in the woods who saved her. Grace stared at the drawing. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. I think she saw you, Luca whispered. She couldn't speak. He stepped back, letting her have the space. I don't want you to go, he said. But if I love you, I can't keep you here. She looked at him, and for a moment, he was no longer the heir to a criminal empire. He was just a boy who lost his sister. A man who had tried to turn vengeance into redemption, and failed. I'll come back, she said.
Maybe not forever.
Maybe not soon. But I'll come back. When the world makes more sense. He nodded once. They didn't kiss. They didn't say goodbye. They just stood there in the fading light, 1,000 things left unspoken between them. Grace left the next morning before sunrise. No guards. No escorts. Just her, a backpack, and the city waking up around her. Back in Brooklyn, her apartment was still there.
Dusty.
Quiet. But it was hers. She returned to Roosevelt Elementary the following week. Her students welcomed her with wide eyes and loud laughter. They didn't ask where she had been. Kids rarely do. She started painting again. For herself this time. Not to forget, but to remember differently. A month later, a package arrived at her door.
No name. No return address.
Inside was a single item. The anchor necklace. She hadn't realized it was missing. She opened the locket. Inside, folded into the hidden compartment, was a photograph. Her and Luca. Taken without their knowledge. Sitting in a cafe in Midtown. Laughing. Heads tilted toward each other.
A moment of peace.
Beneath it, a note in Luca's handwriting.
You were never just the witness.
You were the one who kept her alive in memory. And that matters more than revenge ever did. Grace folded the note and placed it back in the locket. She clasped it around her neck. That weekend, she took the subway to Greenwood Cemetery. She walked past the rows of stone, toward a small grave beneath a tree.
Isabella Moretti. 2000-2010.
She knelt, pulled the drawing from her coat pocket, and placed it beside the flowers. Then she sat in silence for a long time.
À Brézerostel-the-Live.
Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. The world kept turning. Grace didn't know what would come next. Maybe she and Luca would find each other again. Maybe not. But she had kept her promise. She had remembered. She had spoken. She had lived. And in the end, that was enough.